Bradley Manning has waived his right to a trial by jury, and the court-martial is being heard by a judge only. Joining me now with the latest on this case is journalist Denver Nix. He's also the author of Private Bradley Manning, WikiLeaks, and the biggest exposure of official secrets in American history. Denver Nix, welcome to The Heat. You've said that this is one of the most important stories of the last decade. Why?
Well, it's the biggest leak of state secrets in the history of the United States, probably the world. So by that measure alone, it's of extraordinary national security. It's of extraordinary importance to our national security, to the story of American democracy and politically. It's also a fascinating story on a sort of more narrative level because it speaks to central aspects of our times. Bradley Manning is computer savvy in the era when computers sort of take over the world, influenced by the hacker ethic when the hacker ethic sort of goes mainstream. He's gay in the era when gay rights goes mainstream, and in the Army during one of the most pivotal and controversial periods in recent American history, of course, surrounding the Iraq War.
And from an international perspective, the editor of The Guardian says, I can't think of a time when a story generated by a news organization where the White House, the Kremlin, Chavez, India, China, everyone in the world was talking about these things. I've never known of a story to cause such mayhem that wasn't a terrorist attack or a war. And when you frame it that way, it really is extraordinary. And you found that there's a great deal of interest in your book as well, internationally.
That's right. There has been a significant amount of interest in the book and the story internationally. For one thing, because the leak that Bradley Manning perpetrated, which he has admitted to, in part involved cables from U.S. diplomatic outposts all over the world. So everywhere there's an American embassy or an American consulate, there are secrets leaked. That's a local story in every country where the United States has a diplomatic presence, and an international story, of course. It sort of has this unique, as you said, international footprint, kind of unlike anything else before it.
And from an international standpoint, it seems there's a great deal of support for Bradley Manning as well. These are some of the actions taken outside the United States, a petition to give him the Nobel Peace Prize, nearly 60,000 signatures. There's been these efforts in other parts of the world where people are really kind of galvanized around him. Why do you think that is?
Well, there are also efforts in the United States for people to, people galvanizing around Bradley Manning. He's, of course, a divisive issue both in the United States and, I think, internationally. I would suspect that for people who support Bradley Manning around the world, he may represent a challenge to American power and a challenge to what many people perceive to have been a particularly dark period in the history of American foreign policy, in particular surrounding the sort of growth in the American national security state after 9/11 and the tragedy of the Iraq War.
Well, let's talk about the Iraq War and similarities going back in history here in the United States. Daniel Ellsberg, back in 1969, of course, leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. And that talked about how the government had lied about the progress in the Vietnam War. And he's described Manning as a hero. You've had time to, really kind of look at this character, talk to people who know him. How would you describe him?
Well, Bradley Manning is a very bright young man. Who's very ambitious, which is what led him into the Army. He comes from very humble beginnings. He is, as I said, very bright and wanted to go to college, and the Army was sort of the best option available to him to get into college and kind of build a life outside of what had been a very tumultuous and largely sort of impoverished, in a way, childhood. So he comes from humble beginnings and is certainly, I think, idealistic to an extent, very intellectually curious, and very bright in that sense.
Now, others, I said Ellsberg sees him as a hero. Obviously, others say he's a traitor. Were there any items in the information that he released that actually put lives in danger, in your estimation?
Well, there is no evidence that has come out publicly that anything Bradley Manning leaked resulted in physical harm to anybody. Some diplomats lost their jobs. I'm sure some people were reprimanded. But there isn't evidence of, for instance, the Taliban killing killing somebody in Afghanistan who worked with American sources. That was one of the accusations, that Bradley Manning had leaked the names of people who had cooperated with the Americans in Afghanistan, and the Taliban alleged that they were going to seek those people out and exact revenge. There's no evidence that's come out that that has happened. Proving that it hasn't happened is, in a sort of familiar logical conundrum, impossible. But I haven't seen any evidence that it has.
Now, you've also said that a leak like this was inevitable. Why do you think that is?
Well, the context of this leak is, in my estimation, the most important part of the story. Bradley Manning joined the Army in 6 years after the terrorist attack of September 11th that changed the United States in a whole number of ways, one of which was what we've seen, this massive growth in the national security state. I think we produce something like 3 times as more classified documents now than we did before September 11th, 2001. So the growth in the national security state combined with this kind of move toward openness and the ethos of the internet, there's a natural collision there, a natural conflict between secrecy on one hand and openness, interconnectedness on the other. I think those two forces were bound to collide eventually. And in this case, clearly they did.
Well, and another collision has just happened with Edward Snowden.
Right, exactly.
You've got Assange, you've got Snowden, you've got Manning, and they're kind of in this group. And it almost seems like they're all crying out saying, this is not 2013, this is 1984. So what's your thought on that?
Well,
are things out of control, I guess, is the question.
Are things out of control? Secrecy is out of control. We have a secrecy problem in the United States. I hasten to add that we have a secrecy problem because we are not, generally speaking, a secret country. We live in an open society here. And the reason we're having this debate in the United States is that secrecy is anathema to American traditions. We have this debate publicly because we're supposed to have public debates in this country. That's what we do. And as Barack Obama said, somewhat ironically, the president welcomes the debate over the NSA wiretapping. He said he welcomed the debate over the NSA wiretap that has been spurred by Snowden's leak. I say it's ironic because we wouldn't be having that debate if the leak hadn't happened in the first place.
You know, it's interesting. Howard Dean, who ran for president of the United States a few years back, was on television recently saying, you know, that this is all about guarding the American people because of 9/11, which you're pointing out. But he said the problem is who's guarding the guards. And,
right.
And do you see that as the real issue here?
In a sense, the devil's in the details to a larger extent, I think. There are specific problems that lead to overclassification, such as, for instance, the fact that you can get in trouble in the federal government if you don't classify a document that should be kept secret. But there is no punishment, no reprimand for classifying something that shouldn't be classified. Small little details like that actually lead to huge problems. So the devil's in the details there. There is, of course, the who guards the guards problem. I mean, we know who guards the guards in this country. We guard the guards. The American people do. This is a democracy. And that is what people like Edward Snowden are attempting to do.
Transparency is one of the features of this country, and people are really happy about that in the United States. But is that an illusion when we have all of this secrecy?
Is transparency an illusion? No. I mean, transparency is an ideal. Secrecy is important and exists for important reasons. The key is to strike a balance, and we've always kind of there's always a struggle in statecraft for millennia, going back to the first person who plowed up a field and planted wheat and created created human civilization. There's always a tension between secrecy and openness and transparency. The key is to strike a balance there. Right now, unfortunately, I think we're erring on the side of secrecy, but it may be that with these public debates we're having now, we're correcting for that and kind of finding our way back to a middle ground.
We've probably got about a minute left. Just your final thoughts, things that people should know about Bradley Manning and this case that they may not know on the surface.
Well, I would just underline what I said earlier about the context of the leak. The fact that this happened when we are classifying so many more things than we ever did before, creating a situation in which this or something like it was probably inevitable.
Denver Nix, thank you so much for stopping by the Heat.
Thank you.